After paying for the elderly woman's groceries at the store, she gripped my sleeve with trembling fingers and whispered something that made my blood run cold. "The nursery is watching you, daughter's father. Find the blue eye before midnight." I laughed it off as the ramblings of a confused old woman, but when I got home and turned off all the lights in my baby's room, I saw it. A tiny, rhythmic pulse of blue light coming from behind the air vent. What I discovered next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. I was standing in the checkout line at Murphy's Market on Elm Street, bouncing my 10-month-old daughter Emma gently against my shoulder. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that harsh, sterile glow that makes everyone look slightly sick. Outside the windows, Hartford's autumn evening was settling in with a damp chill that seeped through the glass. At 29, I had become an expert at grocery shopping with one hand while keeping a fussy baby calm with the other. Single fatherhood had taught me efficiency born of necessity. In my basket lay the essentials: formula, diapers, a bag of frozen chicken nuggets I could heat up quickly after another 12-hour shift at Morrison Hardware. 3 months since Sarah's funeral, and I was still learning how to be both mother and father to Emma. Ahead of me in line, an elderly woman in a faded gray wool coat that seemed 3 sizes too large was fumbling with her purse. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and deep wrinkles mapped a lifetime across her weathered face. On the conveyor belt sat the most modest of purchases: a small container of baby formula, a loaf of day-old bread, and a single jar of strained carrots. "Ma'am, your card was declined." The cashier, a tired-looking teenager named Marcus, said with barely concealed impatience. "You're short about $8. The old woman's hands trembled as she searched through her worn leather purse again. I was sure I had enough," she whispered, her voice cracking with embarrassment. Maybe I have some cash." Behind me, someone sighed loudly. The line was growing, people eager to get home to their families, their warm dinners, their normal lives. I looked at the hunched figure of the old woman, at her hands red and chapped from the cold, at the baby formula that told a story I didn't want to imagine. When had I last helped a stranger? When had I last looked beyond my own grief and exhaustion to see someone else's need? Emma made a soft cooing sound against my neck, and something in that innocent voice pushed me forward. "Marcus, ring it up with mine," I said, pulling out my last $20 bill. Money I'd been saving for Emma's daycare deposit. "I've got it covered." The old woman turned around, and I involuntarily stepped back at the intensity of her gaze. Her eyes weren't cloudy with age as I'd expected. They were sharp, piercing, almost luminous, as if they could see straight through flesh and bone into the deepest corners of my soul. There was an ancient intelligence there that made the fine hairs on my neck stand up. "Thank you, young father," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a gravity that seemed out of place in the mundane grocery store setting. Her gaze shifted to Emma, who had gone completely still in my arms. "Your kindness echoes through generations. It will be remembered." I shrugged, trying to shake off the strange chill her words had given me. "It's nothing, really. Just paying it forward." The old woman gathered her groceries into a tattered plaid bag, but instead of leaving, she remained standing there, studying me with those unsettling eyes. Marcus finished ringing up my items. Formula, diapers, the sad collection of a man trying to hold his life together with one hand while raising a baby with the other. I had turned to leave, Emma finally settling into a peaceful sleep against my shoulder, when I felt fingers like iron bands grip my sleeve. The old woman had moved with surprising speed for someone so frail, and now she held my jacket with a strength that seemed impossible for her brittle frame. "Listen to me very carefully, daughter's father," she whispered, leaning in so close I could smell mothballs, dried herbs, and something else. Something ancient and earthy that reminded me of turned soil and forgotten places. Her grip tightened until I could feel her nails through the fabric of my jacket. When you put the little one to bed tonight, check the vent in her room. There is a blue eye watching. Find it before the clock strikes 12, or you will lose more than you know. My heart began pounding. What? What are you talking about? What blue eye? Her fingers dug deeper into my sleeve, almost to the point of pain. The watchers think you are broken, easy prey. They feed on the grieving, the alone, the desperate. But you have shown kindness to a stranger, and so I will show kindness to you. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Check the nursery vent. Do not let the blue light remain. Your daughter's future depends on it. I don't understand, I started, but she released my arm and stepped back. Promise me, she said urgently, glancing around the store as if expecting to be overheard. Promise me you will look tonight, before midnight. The blue eye must be found before they know you know. Okay. I agreed, more to escape her intense stare than out of any real belief. I'll check. I promise. The old woman nodded once, satisfied, then turned and walked toward the exit with a swiftness that belied her earlier frailty. I watched through the glass doors as she disappeared into the gathering dusk, moving with purpose down the sidewalk until the shadows swallowed her completely. I stood there for a moment, Emma warm and trusting in my arms, trying to process what had just happened. The poor old woman was clearly confused, maybe dealing with dementia or some other age-related confusion. Blue eyes in vents? Watchers? It sounded like the paranoid delusions of someone who'd spent too many years alone, living in a world of imagined threats and conspiracies. But as I walked to my rusted Honda Civic in the parking lot, I couldn't shake the memory of those piercing eyes, the absolute conviction in her voice, the way Emma had gone completely still when the woman looked at her. And there had been something else. A detail that nagged at me as I strapped Emma into her car seat. The woman had bought baby formula, but she'd called me daughter's father. How had she known Emma was a girl? I'd never mentioned it, and Emma was bundled up in a yellow blanket that revealed nothing. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The drive home through Hartford's winding suburban streets gave me time to think, though my thoughts kept circling back to the old woman's strange warning. Emma slept peacefully in her car seat, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm that had become my anchor in the chaos of single parenthood. 3 months ago, I would have been driving home to Sarah's warm smile, to the smell of whatever elaborate dinner she'd spent the afternoon perfecting. Now I drove home to silence, to a house that still felt too big and too empty despite being filled with all the same furniture. I pulled into the driveway of our small 2-story colonial on Maple Avenue, noting how the neighborhood had changed even in the few months since Sarah's passing. Construction crews seemed to be everywhere these days. Hartford was experiencing what the local papers called a housing renaissance, with property values climbing faster than anyone had expected. Our quiet street, once filled with young families and retirees who'd lived here for decades, was now dotted with sold signs and renovation trucks. As I carried Emma and our groceries up the front steps, I noticed fresh caulking around the window frames. When had that been done? I fumbled for my keys, Emma stirring slightly in her carrier, and tried to remember if Mr. Davidson, my landlord, had mentioned any maintenance work. The lock turned easily, too easily, I realized. Hadn't it been sticking just last week? Inside, the house greeted me with its familiar emptiness, but something felt different. Cleaner somehow, as if someone had been here recently. The heating vents looked newly scrubbed, and there were small scuff marks on the hardwood floor leading toward the staircase. I set Emma's carrier down gently, noting how she remained peacefully asleep despite the change of environment. Usually, she woke up the moment we stopped moving. I carried her upstairs to the nursery, a room Sarah had painted in soft yellows and greens just weeks before Emma was born. The crib stood against the far wall, surrounded by the stuffed animals and musical mobiles that were supposed to stimulate infant development. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, yet something nagged at me, a sense that the space had been subtly altered. The air vent above the crib caught my eye. Had it always been positioned at that exact angle? I couldn't remember, but it seemed to be pointing more directly toward the crib than I recalled. The metal grating looked freshly cleaned, free of the dust that typically accumulated in old houses. When I reached up to touch it, the screws felt loose beneath my fingertips. As I changed Emma into her nighttime diaper and sleeper, my mind wandered to all the small improvements that had appeared around the house over the past month. New weather stripping around the doors, fresh caulking in the bathroom, a peculiar humming sound from the basement that Davidson had dismissed as updating the electrical. At the time, I'd been grateful for a landlord who took maintenance seriously. Now, with the old woman's words echoing in my memory, I wondered why so much work was being done on a rental property in a neighborhood where half the houses were being sold to developers. I fed Emma her bottle, watching her tiny fingers curl around mine as she drank. Her eyes, so much like Sarah's, gazed up at me with that absolute trust that babies have in their caregivers. Whatever the old woman's warning meant, my responsibility was clear. Keep Emma safe, keep our small world intact, keep moving forward one day at a time. By the time I'd finished the evening routine, bottle, burping, the lullaby that Sarah used to sing, it was nearly 10 o'clock. Emma settled into her crib with unusual ease, almost as if something in the room was helping her relax. I stood there for a moment, listening to her soft breathing, trying to shake the persistent feeling that we were not alone in the house. Downstairs, I heated up leftover pizza and tried to focus on the stack of bills that had been accumulating on the kitchen table. Electric, gas, Emma's medical insurance, the car payment that was already 2 weeks late. The numbers swam before my tired eyes, a constant reminder that my grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. Sarah's life insurance had covered the funeral expenses and bought me a few months of breathing room, but that money was nearly gone. I needed to pick up more hours at the hardware store, maybe take on weekend shifts, though the thought of spending even more time away from Emma made my chest tighten. The old grandfather clock in the living room, another of Sarah's antique finds, began its 11 o'clock chime. I'd been meaning to oil the mechanism for weeks. It had developed an odd echo that seemed to reverberate through the walls longer than it should. As the last chime faded, I found myself thinking again about the old woman's warning. Before the clock strikes 12, she'd said, find the blue eye. It was foolish, but something compelled me to check on Emma one more time. I climbed the stairs quietly, avoiding the third step that always creaked. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. Emma was sleeping soundly, her small form barely visible beneath the soft yellow blanket Sarah had knitted during those long winter months when pregnancy had kept her housebound. I was about to turn away when I remembered the old woman's specific instruction. Check the vent. On impulse, I reached for the light switch and plunged the room into darkness. At first, I saw nothing but the usual shadows and the faint glow from the streetlight outside. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I noticed it, a tiny pinprick of blue light emanating from behind the air vent above Emma's crib. It wasn't constant. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat made of light. Soft, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. My mouth went dry. I stood frozen, staring at that impossible blue glow, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a reflection from outside, some kind of electronic device in a neighbor's house casting light through the window. But the pulse was too regular, too purposeful. It looked exactly like the indicator light on a recording device. With trembling hands, I turned the overhead light back on and dragged the rocking chair beneath the vent. The screws were even looser than I'd thought, turning easily with just my fingertips. As the metal grating came free, I saw it clearly. A small, sleek device no bigger than a thumb drive, its blue LED blinking steadily in the darkness of the ventilation shaft. I pulled it out carefully, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid it might wake Emma. The device was warm to the touch, clearly active. Sophisticated, with no identifying marks or brand names. Military grade, if I had to guess, the kind of equipment that belonged in spy movies, not in a baby's nursery in suburban Hartford. Someone had been watching my daughter sleep. The realization hit me like a physical blow. For weeks, maybe months, someone had been recording Emma's most vulnerable moments. They'd watched me change her diapers, feed her bottles, sing her to sleep. They'd seen me break down in tears on the nights when the grief became overwhelming. Seen me hold her close while I whispered promises about the future I was trying to build for us both. I looked down at Emma, still sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware that her privacy had been violated in the most intimate way possible. Rage surged through me, hot and protective. Whoever had done this had turned my daughter into a victim before she was even old enough to understand the concept of safety. The blue light continued its steady pulse in my palm, and I realized that disconnecting it might have triggered some kind of alert. If someone was monitoring the feed remotely, they would know their surveillance had been discovered. I needed to think, to plan, to figure out who was behind this and why they were watching us. But first, I needed to make sure Emma was truly safe. I cradled the device carefully, noting its weight and construction, memorizing every detail. Then I moved to the window and peered through the blinds at the quiet street below. Everything looked normal. Parked cars, porch lights, the usual suburban stillness of a weeknight evening. Yet now I knew that normal was an illusion. Someone out there had been watching us, and they were still watching, waiting to see what I would do next. The old woman's warning had been real, her strange knowledge somehow accurate. But that raised even more questions. Who was she? How did she know about the surveillance? And why had she chosen to help me? I looked at the clock on Emma's dresser. 11:47 p.m. Just minutes before the old woman's midnight deadline. Whatever game was being played, I had stumbled into the middle of it, and my daughter's safety hung in the balance. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The device felt heavier in my palm as I examined it more closely, looking for an off switch or some way to disable it without completely destroying the evidence. The blue light continued its rhythmic pulse, a digital heartbeat that had been recording my family's most private moments. My hands were steady now, the initial shock replaced by cold determination. Whoever had violated our home was about to learn that grief hadn't made me weak. It had made me dangerous. I found what looked like a small power button on the side of the device and pressed it firmly. The blue light flickered once, then went dark. Emma stirred slightly in her crib but didn't wake, as if some invisible tension in the room had finally been released. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The text came from an unknown number. Put it back, or you'll lose everything. The house, the job, the kid. You have 1 hour. Ice flooded my veins. They had been monitoring the feed in real time. They knew I'd found their surveillance device, and they were watching me right now, somehow. I moved quickly to Emma's window and pulled the blinds shut, then checked every other window in the house, closing curtains and blocking any possible sight lines from outside. Another text arrived. We know about the late rent payments. We know about the insurance money running out. We know Davidson has been patient, but patience runs out. Put the device back where you found it. My mind raced. How did they know about my financial situation? About my relationship with my landlord? This wasn't some random surveillance operation. This was targeted, personal, orchestrated by people who had been studying my life in detail. I carried Emma to my bedroom, setting up her travel crib in the corner farthest from any windows. If someone was watching the house, I needed to keep her away from the nursery until I figured out what I was dealing with. She fussed briefly at the disruption but settled quickly, her trust in me absolute and heartbreaking. I needed help, and I needed it from someone who understood technology. Marcus Chen had been my roommate in community college before I dropped out to marry Sarah. Now he worked for a cybersecurity firm in Boston, specializing in corporate espionage cases. We'd stayed in touch sporadically, but he was the only person I knew who might be able to trace where the surveillance device was transmitting. I found his number and called, despite the late hour. "Kalen? Jesus, man, it's almost midnight. Everything okay? Marcus, I need your help. Someone's been spying on my baby through a hidden camera, and they're threatening me to put it back. Can you trace where this thing was sending data?" There was a pause. "Are you serious? This isn't some paranoid new parent thing? I'm holding the device right now. It's military-grade equipment, and whoever placed it knows details about my life they shouldn't have access to." Okay, I'm listening. What exactly did you find?" I described the device in detail, reading him the model numbers I could make out in the dim light. Marcus walked me through how to connect it to my laptop using a USB adapter, his voice becoming more serious as he guided me through the technical process. "Holy shit, Kalen. This thing has been transmitting continuously for 3 months. High-definition video and audio, encrypted data stream, professional-grade stuff. This isn't some creep with a hidden camera. This is corporate surveillance." "Corporate? What would a corporation want with videos of my baby?" "Give me a few minutes to trace the data pathway. Keep the line open." I could hear him typing rapidly, muttering technical terms I didn't understand. Emma made soft sleeping sounds from her crib, and I found myself checking the door every few seconds, expecting someone to break in and demand their device back. "Got it," Marcus said finally. The signal was routing through several proxy servers, but I tracked it back to the source. It's registered to Hartwell Development and Investments, right there in Hartford. They're a real estate development company. Real estate? I don't understand. Let me dig deeper. Okay, this is interesting. According to their corporate filings, they've been buying up properties in your neighborhood for the past 18 months. Looks like they're planning some kind of major commercial development. An energy storage facility. According to the permits they filed with the city, the pieces began falling into place. The neighborhood's sudden popularity with developers, the construction crews, the improvements to the house that had seemed so generous from Davidson. "They need the whole street," I said slowly, "but they can't force people out unless they can prove the tenants are undesirable," Marcus finished. "Kalen, I think they've been documenting your life to build a case that you're an unfit tenant, maybe an unfit father. Create enough evidence of instability, and they can pressure your landlord to evict you or pressure social services to remove Emma." My hands clenched into fists. They had been watching my daughter, recording my grief, documenting my struggles as a single father, all to manufacture evidence that I was failing. Every moment of weakness, every tear shed in the privacy of my home, every time exhaustion had made me less than perfect. It was all being cataloged and weaponized against me. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The device was accessing your home Wi-Fi network. They've been pulling data from your personal devices too. Bank records, email, text messages. Kalen, they know everything about your financial situation, your work schedule, even your medical records from when Emma was born." "How is that legal?" "It's not. This is a federal crime on multiple levels. But here's the thing. I can see from the device logs that the initial installation was done with legitimate access codes. Someone gave them the keys to your house." My blood turned to ice. Only 3 people had keys to the house. Me, Davidson, and Sarah's sister Rebecca, who had helped with Emma during those first difficult weeks after the funeral. Davidson had no reason to cooperate with developers who wanted to tear down his rental properties. Which meant, "Rebecca," I whispered. I thought about Sarah's sister, who had been struggling with gambling debts for years, who had been unusually helpful after Sarah's death, insisting on watching Emma while I worked extra shifts, who always seemed to need to use the bathroom upstairs, claiming the downstairs toilet was broken, who had asked detailed questions about my work schedule and when I would be out of the house. My phone buzzed with another text. "Time's running out. Put it back now or we make the call to Child Protective Services tomorrow. We have enough footage to prove you're an unstable parent." But they had made a mistake. By threatening me directly, they had revealed how much they needed their surveillance to continue, which meant they didn't have enough evidence yet, despite months of recording. And now, thanks to Marcus, I had evidence of their illegal activities. "Marcus, can you copy all the data from this device? Everything it recorded and transmitted." "Already done. I've got terabytes of surveillance footage, plus logs of all their data theft from your personal devices. This is enough to put them away for years." "And can you trace exactly who's been accessing the feeds?" "Working on it." "Okay. I've got IP addresses for 7 different users who've been viewing your surveillance footage regularly. Let me cross-reference with corporate records." "Jesus, Kalen. The CEO of Hartwell Development has been personally watching your feeds almost daily." The scope of the violation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they been spying on Emma, but the head of a major development company had been personally viewing intimate footage of our family life. It was sick, predatory, and completely illegal. I made my decision. Instead of responding to their threats, I called the Hartford Police Department and asked to speak to a detective. Then I called the FBI field office in New Haven. Then I called Channel 8 News, because I wanted the story to go public before anyone could cover it up. By dawn, my house was crawling with federal agents, local detectives, and news crews. The surveillance device sat on my kitchen table, surrounded by evidence bags and technical equipment, as specialists documented every aspect of the illegal operation. Emma slept peacefully through most of it, safely tucked away in my bedroom while law enforcement took apart the criminal enterprise that had been built around our daily lives. The arrests came quickly once the FBI had the device data. Hartwell Development's executives were taken into custody on charges of corporate espionage, identity theft, illegal surveillance, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Rebecca was arrested at her apartment, where investigators found bank records showing payments from Hartwell totaling $15,000 in exchange for providing access to my home and information about my schedule. The betrayal hurt more than I had expected. Sarah had loved her sister despite her flaws, had trusted her with Emma's care. To learn that Rebecca had sold out her own niece for gambling money felt like losing Sarah all over again. But there was justice in the aftermath. The federal case against Hartwell Development revealed a pattern of illegal surveillance targeting dozens of families across Connecticut and Massachusetts. The company had been systematically spying on tenants and homeowners to manufacture evidence for forced relocations, insurance fraud, and property manipulation schemes. The scandal made national news, with Emma's case becoming the primary example of how far the company had gone in violating privacy rights. The settlement negotiations took 6 months. Hartwell Development, facing criminal charges and a public relations nightmare, agreed to a 7-figure settlement to avoid extended litigation. The money was more than enough to buy a house in a quiet New Jersey suburb, far from Hartford and the memories of surveillance and violation. I used part of the settlement to enroll in a cybersecurity certification program while Emma stayed with a trusted babysitter, someone whose background I had personally verified. The experience of being surveilled had taught me how vulnerable ordinary families were to digital predators, and I wanted to make sure no other parent went through what we had endured. 2 years later, I was working for a firm that specialized in protecting families from corporate surveillance, using my experience as a victim to help other parents identify and combat illegal monitoring. Emma was walking now, chattering in the mixed-up language of toddlers, completely unaware that she had once been the center of a federal criminal investigation. Sometimes I thought about the old woman in the grocery store, the mysterious stranger who had somehow known about the surveillance and chosen to warn me. I never saw her again, despite making several trips back to Hartford to testify in the criminal trials. It was as if she had appeared just long enough to set the wheels of justice in motion, then vanished back into whatever shadows she had emerged from. On quiet evenings, when Emma was asleep in her new nursery, a room I had personally swept for surveillance devices and secured with commercial-grade privacy protections, I would sometimes wonder how many other families were being watched, manipulated, and victimized by people who saw privacy as a commodity to be bought and sold. But then Emma would wake up and call for me, her voice bright with the absolute trust that children have in their parents, and I would remember that some battles are worth fighting, that sometimes strangers show unexpected kindness, and that even in a world where watchers hide behind every screen, love and vigilance can still create spaces that are truly safe. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going.